welcome to the Teresa Lusk Show. I am your host, Teresa Lusk, and I'm here with Jaime Kohlmann. Welcome, Jaime.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Listen, Jaime is actually running for the Texas State Board of Education, and there is no time like the present where this position is extremely important. Would you agree?
I totally agree.
Okay. Now, I invited Jaime on the show, and I am passionate about what's happening in education in this season. And I can tell you that there's so many things going on as parents, educators are going through a lot. And truly, we need a person who is going to be outstanding, unafraid, and unapologetic. So I gave her a warning. I said, I'm going to ask you some hard questions. I think it's a fair season to ask some honest questions for the sake of our state,
Yes.
for the sake of our children, for the sake of our parents, for the sake of educators. So Jaime, tell us just briefly a little bit about yourself, and I'm going to get straight to the questions that a lot of people want to know.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on here. This will be fun. I'm not afraid of hard questions.
Good.
And I wouldn't be running if I didn't think this was a really important place to be.
Yes.
Such a time as this,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So I have a background in education policy. I'm a product of public schools, grew up in the mid-cities, Hurst-Euless, Bedford. My parents are still in Bedford in the same house I grew up in, and went to school, studied economics at Rice, learned about Milton Friedman there, so learned about school choice, learned about education policy in general, volunteered in a lot of low-income public schools in Houston at that time, and then decided to go into education policy. It was a couple years after graduation, so not immediately. But went to work in Austin for the Texas Public Policy Foundation, gave testimony, wrote white papers, wrote model legislation, had countless briefings with legislators just trying to educate them on different conservative issues surrounding education.
Okay.
Did that for 3 years specific to education, and then was recruited to go to Hawaii, the most Democrat-leaning legislature at the time in the whole country.
Wow.
And pushed for conservative reforms there as well, both in education but also just general government taxes, spending, things like that. Came back, worked on education more, and then also started shifting more into pro-life work, which has always been a passion of mine as well. And so I have about 13 years total experience in conservative policy, about half of which was specifically education.
Okay.
Today I'm a real estate agent, and I'm a mom of 3 young kids. They are 9, almost 7, and 5. They are really what motivate me to run, because I am concerned about the world they are growing up in, and the world that the public schools that 85% or more of our kids are enrolled in, and what they are being, first of all, what they're not learning, but then what they are learning in those schools.
Okay. All right. So you're passionate because of your own children. It's been a motivation. It's been an inspiration. When it comes to education, I think we can agree that there are such varying degrees of agreement and disagreement. So I'm going to start with this question. What does the Texas State Board of Education do? And are they different than the Texas Education Agency?
Yes, they are very different. So the legislature is really the ultimate source of authority. They can give authority to the State Board of Education. They can take it away.
Okay.
The State Board of Education is 15 members statewide, so our districts are twice as large even as state senate districts, largest districts in the state, more than 2 million people each. The TEA is a government agency.
Okay.
So those are full-time employees. I think last count was something like 1,200 of them, bureaucrats, if you will. The commissioner, the head of the Texas Education Agency, is appointed by the governor. So you have the legislature that's elected by the people, you have the State Board of Education that's elected by the people, and then you have the Texas Education Agency, which are government employees.
So you said our governor appointed
The commissioner.
the
of
commissioner
education.
at this point. Interesting point. I'm not going to get into that right now, but
Yes.
it's a very interesting point to have found out. This is why we need to ask these kinds of questions.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. So when it comes to authority, who has more weight, or is there such a thing? How does that work?
I would say it's really the legislature, because they make the laws.
Okay.
They can, like I mentioned, they can give authority to the TEA or to the SBOE, State Board of Education. I'll call it SBOE moving forward. they can also take it away. And there have been seasons throughout the last few decades where the SBOE does something the legislature doesn't like, so they take away some authority, kind of a slap on the hand type thing.
Okay.
Now we're at a point where they've actually been granted more authority, even more in the last year, really.
Okay.
And so the main areas of authority for the State Board of Education are in the curriculum standards. So they set and approve the curriculum standards in the state. Those are the TEKS.
Okay.
Also instructional materials. They approve instructional materials.
Okay.
I would group that all into a big curriculum bucket. Some lesser known areas of authority are approving new charter school applications.
Okay.
Are oversight over the permanent school fund, which is the $53 billion endowment that serves as sort of the backbone of state spending for education in Texas. And then there are some other things. They have oversight over the State Board of Education educator certification.
Okay.
They get to approve their recommendations. But really the biggest one and the most time consuming one is that curriculum piece.
All right. Well, they're all very important pieces for sure. Is there ever a time when the TEA and the State Board of Education come to a head?
I am sure there are.
Okay.
I think it's really what ends up happening, and this is one reason I'm running, frankly, is the State Board of Education members, they're not paid. It's a volunteer position. They don't even have a staff.
Okay.
Now, I'm not saying that as an excuse, because I think you need to find a way to get your work done and to do what's best. But because of that setup and because of the fact that, across the street here, we have 1,200 full-time employees, the state board ends up delegating a lot of the sort of background work to the TEA.
Okay, that makes sense.
So when it comes time to, for instance, rewrite social studies curriculum standards, they say, they may, to be fair, the state board members, some of them may nominate someone from their district to serve on those committees. The TEA may or may not, probably does not listen to them. The TEA assigns whoever they like to these committees, and then they tend to not be people who share my worldview, at least, and then you end up with results accordingly. And so you end up with revisionist history, you end up with saying that the Alamo was fought because of slavery, you end up crossing out any mention of radical Islamic terrorism from the TEKS because that could offend certain people. Now, fortunately, in that example I'm giving, which is a very specific one, that was in 2022, the state board ultimately punted. They did not vote to approve those terrible standards, thank God. So they punted that to 2025, and it will be taken up again next year. But that's just an example of you can't let the process be delegated to the TEA. It became a total train wreck. That's why they weren't rewritten like they should have been in 2022. And we need people. I'm running because I want to enlist Eagle Forum and Grassroots America, We the People, and teach first. I mean, there's groups of teachers and content experts who also happen to share my worldview that should be on these working committees, not people that the bureaucrats at the TEA appointed.
Okay. So how many people are on the Board of Education, and are these conservatives, liberals? Tell us a little bit about their political stance.
Great question. So there are 15 members, each representing, like I said, more than 2 million people. So huge districts. There's 12 counties, 2 partial and 10 full counties in my district, all the way from Dallas to Gainesville to Texarkana and back. So really large. Of those 15 right now, 10 are Republican. So a 2/3 majority of Republicans. In my opinion, Republicans should be running the table. We shouldn't have. One thing I learned from the TEA commissioner last year is that only 19% of our instructional materials in public schools are at grade level. So it's like, well, I'm sure we'll get into the STAR test in a bit, but there's the STAR test. We have a lot of issues and concerns about teaching to the test.
Yes.
But when the instructional materials are below grade level, you have to teach to the test because you can't just teach the instructional materials or the kids will fail the test.
Right.
So the fact that 19% of our instructional materials, only 19% are at grade level, the fact that we have all of these different concerns with the sort of woke infiltration into our curriculum and our instructional materials, those things should not be happening when you have 10 Republicans on the board. Right. So I would say, you asked about conservatives, not Republicans, I would say about 3 of them are really solid, bold conservatives.
Mhm.
That's why we need more,
Right.
and then we can all kind of gel together.
Well, because the Republican Party is being redefined to some degrees, the boundary is moving further to the middle, more moderate, etc. But when it comes to our education, we want good, healthy, wholesome education. But there are I've got quite a bit of questions for you, because I know that there are educators watching. There are people who are passionate about our education. And so let's talk about the STAR test pretty quickly. I've never met a teacher, now or even years prior, that has said, oh, I love the STAR test. I think it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
How would you, as a board member, be able to shift that? And I get what you're saying, that you have to teach the test or they fail. But honestly, it is of my opinion that we need to get some actual teachers, people who've actually taught, who have spent the years, invested the time, the sweat, the tears, because tears come, and they are the ones who should be able to be heard to what do we do for the future of these students. We can't, this is the problem with, I believe, our political system, is that all these people with opinions are running, but nobody with true education who's actually had to pay the price. Or how much of their wisdom and their knowledge are we incorporating into our future decisions as elected officials, etc. So tell us your position on the STAR test.
Okay, so let's talk big picture first, and then I've also never met a parent who loves the STAR test. So
Amen.
it's not just teachers.
Yes.
Probably aren't any students who love it either. Maybe a few of the
Oh,
weird
no,
rule following,
Yeah.
front of the class students. But so big picture, we have to have accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Now I am a fan of giving parents ultimate accountability by letting them choose the school
Mhm.
for their children.
Yes.
We have some degree of that among public school choice and charter schools in Texas, so that helps. The more we can do of that, the better. Absent total accountability, where parents can full stop choose the school for the best school for their kids' needs, we have to have some sort of what I would call taxpayer accountability. What are our kids actually learning? Are they learning? So forth.
Mm-hmm.
The STAR test, I would argue, does not do a good job at that. A few reasons. One, I already mentioned, the curriculum challenges we have then lead to us teaching to the test.
Mm-hmm.
Another one, and I think there are legitimate and hopeful reasons, attempts to address this. One thing right now that's going on is a pilot in certain districts to split the STAR test up into a few different units. So maybe you do one in the fall, one in early spring, one in late spring, something like that, trimesters or whatever, which I think helps. It helps both in just sort of retention of what you're learning about it, and then you're getting tested on it. It also helps to maybe not focus so much on teaching to the test, because what they're doing right now is they have this one big test at the end of the year, but then what I've heard is that some districts are doing pre-tests half a dozen times or more. And so by splitting it up, maybe if they're going to be doing pre-tests anyway, well, let's just make those the test and let's split it up. So that's a pilot that at least people are thinking creatively about ways to minimize the high stakes focus.
But do you know who's coming up with what they're being tested on? Because again, all we're doing now is taking the test and breaking it up in sections. I get that it puts less stress on the teacher and student, but it's still who's coming up with the information.
So the TEA is of the entities we talked about earlier. It's the TEA that's in charge of the STAR test.
And the TEA is made up of
Bureaucrats.
that. Right back to my issue.
Not elected officials.
Not teachers or educators.
A lot
or
of them are
administrators?
former teachers in the TEA.
Okay.
But that's
Okay.
there's no rules around that. It's just it turns out that a lot of them are former teachers.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that is, I hope there will be. I mean, I think it was the governor who recently said at one of his appearances or press conference or something that he is going to get rid of the STAR test next session. So, okay. So I hope that what we are moving towards is something that is less high stakes, that is more diagnostic, that shows what they're learning throughout the year,
Right.
not just what they know at this one snapshot in time, but where they started, where they finished, you can attribute that growth largely to those teachers in that year and not penalize them for where those kids came in.
Right.
So that's the direction we have to go. It's a legislature, it's a TEA thing, but that's the other thing. State board members, we may not have specific authority over that, but it's obviously education related.
Right.
We can meet with the governors, we can meet with the legislators, we can go give testimony, which anybody, you and I can do that today, but you can do that with the title of the State Board of Education member and maybe have a little more of a pulpit from which to speak.
Have you ever heard that the move behind the test, the STAR test, is money driven? We know there's a test creator, provider.
Mm-hmm.
Is there such a, have you ever heard of that, and what are your thoughts on that?
I've heard that not only about the test, but about a lot of it's a big state.
Mm-hmm.
Education is a big business. Textbooks are a big business. Education
Yes.
technology is a big business. Don't get me started on that.
Yeah.
The fewer screens, the better, in my
Yeah.
opinion. So all of those are concerns. And maybe that's a reason to bring more of that. I mean, I don't love government kind of controlling everything, but at the same time, I'd rather keep those things in house, really customize them for the needs of our state,
Mm-hmm.
and not see all of that money go out to these different vendors.
Right,
Mhm.
exactly. Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the voucher issue, because there's so much battle between it, and I've heard two varying sides. I have my own opinion, and honestly, I think that there's I understand what each side believes, including my own, including that which I disagree with, for as far as what becomes the law or norm, etc. So, if there were, with the voucher system, would there be a reduction in teacher pay? And I've heard that question straight from teachers, actually.
I don't believe there would be. The reason I don't is because the flexibility it would allow, first of all, teachers that want to be entrepreneurial and sort of be their own boss could go start like a one-room schoolhouse almost, if you will, a micro school. They get 20 kids in their micro school. They get $8,000 a pop. That's $160,000. Admittedly, some of that has to go to paying the rent or
Correct.
whatever.
Sure.
But I think there are some excellent entrepreneurial teachers who would take that and run with it. And you're already seeing that some, not as part of a voucher system, but just after COVID, you see these micro schools popping up, and almost like parents pooling together, like you would a tutor, but they're pooling together and kind of having 3 or 4 families in a school.
Okay.
So I think you would see more of that popping up. And then ultimately, though, the more, teachers are the most important factor in the education, in the success of these kids, right? And so, to the extent that success is now, parents now have the choice of where to send those kids, there's going to be that much more importance and that more focus placed on teachers, and I think the teaching profession will be elevated.
Okay. Well, I think that position has not really been heard. I don't think I've heard somebody address that necessarily. So maybe that's something that needs to be given more of a voice, because a lot of the educators, if we're truly honest, most educators, if they lean left, it's because of education. I have seen that they're very conservative in some areas, but very left-leaning in others because of education, because they feel like, well, those students who don't have the money to just take part of the money that they would get from their taxes that their parents are paying and apply them to another school, well, they still wouldn't have the opportunity, is how they see it.
Right.
So I think it's important to hear that maybe there's some creative ways. I think anything that you're trying to tear down and then rebuild would take a few years to see the success of it, but you've got to give it time to see the success. However, most people don't say, well, let my child be the test of that, right? So if we're honest, I can see why that's happening. Right. Another question that I had from teachers is, why are schools closing? You know that there's been closings in Allen and Plano. What is the deal? And maybe even nationwide, I don't know.
Oh, yeah. There is a trend away from public schools. And in Texas, at least, it's not because of vouchers. It's because, especially, it was accelerated by COVID. I think people saw what their kids were learning or not learning, and in many cases were mortified and did what they could to put them in a different situation, whether that was sacrificing in homeschooling, whether that was sacrificing in sending their kids to a Christian school or some other private school, whether it was sending them to a charter school, which is still a public school, but you know what I mean, taking them out of the ISD school. So you see declining enrollment across a lot of these districts. I mean, even in I was told even in Highland Park ISD, one of the most sought after, it's driving high property values in that whole district. They are not hitting, I don't think they're declining, but they are not hitting the forecasts. I mean, they built a 5th elementary school a few years ago because they were expecting their enrollment to keep going up. It's not. It's at best it's flat. It may have even gone down a little bit. And so so that's why these schools are closing. They just don't have enough kids to fill them. And obviously there's fixed costs, right, to having a school open, and if it's only at 80% capacity, you can't just do that across the whole district.
Right, okay. I believe in supporting parents, the parents' rights, 100%, and but I also believe in supporting the teachers who feel like they've not been heard, supported, etc. How do you plan on doing that? Because there's some hopelessness out there on both sides. Like, I see the parents, and we'll get to that question in a little bit, because we're going to talk about being the exception when moving your children out of public school. But how does somebody who is on the State Board of Education support a teacher and teachers in general who feel tired, worn out, overworked, penalized because tests aren't great, test scores aren't great? How do you support that? How do you get a better, just idea of, hey, there's a good reason to join the education field?
Couple answers to that. One, first and foremost, is listen. I mean, I haven't been elected yet. I'm just out on the campaign trail day and night lately, but I come across so many teachers. Some are still teaching, some have retired, some were teaching but left prior to retirement because of the challenges they were facing. I have one who is still teaching but is incredibly frustrated and is supporting me and is going to throw an event for me because she sees that she appreciates that I'm listening. Really, that's why. So I think listening first and foremost, and I would love to, once I get past the May 28th runoff, I would love to start kind of hit the ground running, preparing to serve on the SBOE by reaching out to different constituencies, obviously teachers being a primary one. So I think that's really important. And then just back to the school choice, there are so many things we can do, some within the state board, some within the legislature, to professionalize and elevate the teaching career. I think I didn't hit on this a minute ago, but when you're talking about school choice, it's not just parents who have greater choice, it's also teachers who have greater choice to then go teach in maybe a little bit different setting, from not just a micro school, but just a different school that maybe doesn't have capacity right now for kids or teachers, and more of them would be able to open up. So I think that's one way. I think also, once the curriculum is where we need it to be and teachers can spend their time teaching, not trying to cobble together lesson plans because it's so weak that we have to go on Pinterest and pull together lesson plans. No, we can hand them, not that you can't go beyond it and be creative, of course, please do that. But here's a really good gold standard curriculum. Here's really good lesson plans that you can use if you choose to, or you can go beyond them if you choose to, and you can spend your time teaching, not just doing the paperwork, doing the preparation before class. Yeah.
And I think there's a lot, the planning time takes hours, but not just that, there's a lot of little ins and outs that teachers are assigned, and this thing. There needs to be some restriction on how many hours a teacher can work. I'm very serious about that. There are teachers who are so worn out, working more hours than they should, and somebody needs to vouch for them as well. So let's talk about the exception. So, and this kind of goes back to school choice. There are people who are pretty upset about the voucher system because I go back to the point of they felt like that it's going to leave out the lower income students. Let's talk very honestly and candidly about that, because there are people who've been teaching for years and say, well, if you do this, then the students who aren't able to. And when my students, my kids, my own children, I have a a junior. He's in a Christian private school, but before that, him and my oldest daughter, or she's my middle child, she's 20. Both of my kids were in public school for years. But when Obama came out and said, hey, boys can share the restroom with girls, I said, no, sir, we're not doing that. Pulled my children out of school. And financially, we didn't do it because we had the money sitting around. We cut down on every imaginable thing, which, by the way, we already lived almost paycheck to paycheck. And I just said, we will do anything we have to do to keep our children from certain environments, because that's not safe, okay? Regardless of what your ideas are, if you're okay with it, that's on you. But my children will not be in that environment. So we cut down in ways that most people would never understand. And some people will say, well, but you were the exception. And I said, guess what? I know a lot of exceptions. I know a lot of parents who don't have the money to pay it, but they turn their world upside down in ways that, unless you come and ask me very private questions, you're not going to know how I did this. So there are a lot of exceptions out there, parents who don't have the money but are turning the world upside down to give their children a safer, better life. Because I didn't move my children from the public school due to their education type, although I was very frustrated at how hard they worked them, these poor students. But really my main concern was safety and just how illogical some of these things were turning into. When there is somebody who says, well, my student would never be able to, what do you say to that? Because I would have loved to take that money that we could get back and applied it. Do you know how many thousands of dollars? You know, and my son still has one more year.
Yes. So to me, that I hear a lot of people say right now, well, we already have school choice. And we do. No one is forced to go to the public school if it's against their will. But the ones who are leaving now are the higher income ones. They are the ones where maybe it's a single income family, and so the other parent can homeschool. They are the parents like you who had to live paycheck to paycheck to do it, but had the energy and the conviction and the ability to do that. So right now we have this bifurcated system of the haves and the have-nots. What a voucher or an ESA program or however you accomplish it does is it gives the other kids who are still here, which admittedly are largely the lowest income, the non-English speaking households, it gives them an ability that is more similar to what the choice these other people have made. Now, I don't think it's a silver bullet. I think the vast majority of kids will still be in the public schools, but I think it will, most importantly and urgently, it will give an escape route for the kids that are really being underserved and aren't learning and are being left behind right now. But it does start to bring more into balance that sense of competition, that sense of serving a customer rather than just serving someone who is stuck at your school and they can't do anything.
Is it because now they have smaller numbers, so now the teacher can reflect or give more attention to a smaller class, or how does that happen? How do the kids who are admittedly underprivileged, underserved, how do they benefit then?
Let me give you an example. I think ultimately it comes down to responsiveness of the schools, not necessarily the teachers, but the administration and the whole culture that's there. Give you an example. And the law may have changed, but back when I was doing education policy full-time in Texas, and it is still the case that kids who are in bilingual education the school gets more money for those kids. It's something like a 10%, I may be off a little bit, but something like a 10% bump. Okay, they get more money for kids also special ed, but right now I'm talking about bilingual education. There's no limit on that. You can keep those kids in bilingual education for all 13, 14 years of their public school career. And in fact, there is incentive for the districts to do that because they get more funding as long as those kids are in bilingual education. I did a FOIA request and requested the forms that, because these parents have to be given the ability to opt out of bilingual education. And there were many parents, and I've heard from them and spoken to them, and they say, yes, do this for a year or so and get my kid kind of acclimated, but I don't want my kid in bilingual education for 12 years.
Right.
I want them to become excellent English speakers, go to college, and have a better life than I have. So this form, I got multiple dozens probably from districts all over the state, and it listed all the benefits of bilingual education. It said your child qualifies for bilingual education. Here are all the benefits. And then it had a checkbox that was like, yes, I want to enroll my child in bilingual education. And there was no checkbox for no. At the bottom it said, if you have concerns about enrolling in bilingual education, please call your school's principal.
Wow.
These are non-English speaking parents. They are not going to pick up the phone and call their school's principal. But because they had no other choice for where to go to school, and because these districts had incentive to keep them in bilingual education, that's where those kids were stuck.
Okay.
It's a travesty. And if those parents had the option to go to a different school where they weren't forced into this bilingual, I guarantee many of them would have done it.
Oh, 100%. You're running against the incumbent. What is her name? His name.
Her name is Pam Little.
Okay. I looked up your policies, and you're running on Interest Parents Protect Kids Reclaim Education. I want you to tell us a little bit about your policies, and then how do they differ from the incumbent?
So I mentioned earlier, I think we really need to gain control as conservatives, take ownership of this curriculum, these working committees, the curriculum standards process. So that's one thing. I think we need vigilance. One thing that disappointed me about the incumbent and really the whole state board at the time was when they approved the African American Studies course, which is great. We should have an African American Studies course. They approved it with a course description that mentioned multiple times the year 1619 on just this couple paragraph course description. Okay, well 1619 is an important date in relation to African American Studies. But the problem is that on that course description, it said the colonial period, 1619 to 1776. I guarantee you the colonial period started before that.
Sure.
It started in 1607 is what most people would say, with the founding of Jamestown. And so by elevating the date of 1619 to the importance of the beginning of the colonial period, you are rewriting history. You are giving a victory to CRT and to the 1619 project, because that is a dog whistle for the left. And when I've asked the incumbent about that in these forums, she hasn't said, you know what, that was an oversight. The colonial period really did start in 1607. We should fix that course description. She has doubled down. She has said, yes, 1619, the beginning of the colonial period, over and over and over again. And I think that's fundamentally wrong. I think it's revisionist history, and I think it's not understanding what we're up against with the leftist indoctrination.
Tell me a little bit about the 1619 project, because I think a lot of people who are watching may not actually know what that is.
Yeah, so that was it was started, I believe, as an article, and then became kind of a whole series project. That's what we call the 1619 Project by the New York Times. That and the importance of the date 1619, according to that project, is that is when the first enslaved African Americans arrived on U.S. soil. But again, they have elevated that. They are trying to rewrite history and say that America was founded on slavery. It wasn't founded on slavery. America was founded not as we know it, America, but settlers were here. Colonialism had already begun before slavery was ever brought to the United States.
I see what you're saying. Okay, all right. So I see where the disparity is between the two opinions. Okay. There are, one of the things you talked about for your policies is reclaiming education. And I can tell you that as I was reading the description, I know very well-meaning, non-left-leaning people who really care about taking out certain materials. Because there's been an accusation about people taking out certain materials from schools. What is the issue there? What's going on with that? Can you speak into that?
As far as inappropriate materials.
Well, I mean, they seem to think that you're taking appropriate material, or they are taking even appropriate material. Like there's things that are debatable, right? So what is the deal with that? What is...
I don't know what's debatable about trans resource guides being handed out to elementary students in Dallas ISD. I don't know what's debatable about sexually explicit materials being in school libraries. I think what's really interesting is that you mentioned it's not, there's people on the left, there's centrist, there's right. there's been some really interesting coalitions here, because there was a district where there was a lot of kind of conservative Christian parents who tried to band together and get some of these books, pornographic books, out of the library. They weren't listened to by the school board. And so then some Muslim parents, who probably don't always vote the same way as the Christian parents, certainly don't believe all of the same things,
Right.
as far as their faiths go, but they do believe that kids should not, it's a conservative, culturally it's a conservative culture, and they do believe that kids should not be reading pornography. And so the Muslim parents and the Christian parents kind of bounded together and were able to get those books out, which is wonderful. I mean, that's exactly what we should be doing. We should be getting together in areas where it makes sense and on areas where we can agree. Let's form those coalitions. Let's do what's right for kids, even if that means stepping a little bit outside of the bubble that we are typically in.
Okay, all right. So this is education, and in Texas, where it's such a battlefield, really, because we are, or have been historically, a conservative state, proud of who we are, and I was born and raised in Dallas. I'm a Texas girl, 100%. So there are a lot of questions that are still going to be floating around. We really need a revision of the entire board, I would think, of the state of Texas, don't you think? I mean, if this is how many things are going around, why not go ahead and get it all fixed up now, so that we can see the turning over. So with that being said, I suspect that you may have some people reaching out and asking you questions. So where can people reach you?
So my website is jamiefortx.com. JamieForTX.com. You can also, I'm on Facebook at Jamie for Texas. I think you'll find me. Sorry, I forget. Yeah. You can find me, Jaime Kohlmann for Texas. Kohlmann is spelled a little funny. We joke.
Spell it out.
KOHLMANN.
Okay.
My maiden name was Story, STORY. If I had had any idea I would be running for the State Board of Education, I would have just kept my maiden name. Can you see the little logo with the book and Jamie's Story? But I love my husband and I love my name and I'll keep it. But it is a little hard to spell. So.
All right. Any last words that you'd like to say to our viewers? Go ahead and
well, I appreciate that. No, thank you. I mean, I really, what this comes down to, the reason I'm running, I think we need fighters on the State Board of Education. I think we are in a battle for the heart and soul of our state and our nation, and I think the left has been incredibly successful in taking that battle to the front lines of our public schools. I think it's in conservatives' nature to sort of sit back and let processes play out, and we're limited government people, and that's great, but where that's gotten us, that complacency has gotten us trans resource guides. It's gotten us excessive screen time in public schools. It's gotten us social emotional learning, which we didn't even have to come back and talk about that sometime. We can't have that. We have 10 Republicans on the State Board of Education. Those things should not be existing in our public schools right now. We need new blood. We need fighters. We need people on offense, not defense. And that's why I'm running.
There you go. Well, thank you for that. And you hear this. There are 10 Republicans on the board, and you still see the same things happening. That should be a red flag for everybody. Like I said, it's time to redo the whole thing, in my opinion. And so thank you so much for coming on and answering
Teresa.
Hard and good questions.
And May 28th is the runoff, and then the week prior is early voting. So we'd love to have your vote.
There you go. Well, thank you so much for watching, friends. God bless.